So it's still like sleepy, so he's giving me a pillow. It's just, if I sleep, don't blink. I think we can comfortably say there are changes after Ramadan. Now there's a pillow, inshallah. Is it recording? Yes. Oh, it's already recorded. I better be careful. It's on record now. Let's see how the mic is today. Let's see how the mic is after Ramadan. Is it behaving or not behaving? It's always a puzzle. Mic is always a puzzle. So you don't know. How is it? How is it? Good? Okay. Should I keep it here?
I mean, it's fine. They can hear it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Okay.
It has to be at a certain distance, I was told. How is it? Good for recording?
Yeah.
Okay, alhamdulillah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم افتح علينا فتحا مبينا وارزقنا رزقا مباركا كريما. اللهم اجعل القرآن العظيم ربيع قلوبنا ونور أبصارنا وجلاء أحزاننا وذهاب همومنا وغمومنا يا رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. In the name of Allah Azza wa Jal, the Beneficent, the Gracious, the Merciful, and may the peace and blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal be upon His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, it's good to be back. And we're just enjoying the bliss of Ramadan. And kind of took a while to kind of overcome, I guess, some of the sadness, the departure, right? The month. So alhamdulillah, here we are. We're alive, and Allah never ceases to operate and provide His guidance and His healing and His mercy. Alhamdulillah, Ramadan left, but Allah Azza wa Jalla is with us. And here we are resuming, by the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jalla, the gift of studying and reflecting on His words. And whatever understandings we have, even our very action of coming to the house of Allah to study His word is an action of Allah. Just keep that in mind. It's the mercy of Allah that steered us here for healing, for growth, for enlightenment. Mercy of Allah, purely. So, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. And that we're able to live to this moment and be touched by the revelation of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And just want to make a comment. So I was really curious, and Sister Zuruda knows why. I was curious who will show up today, for many reasons, right? It's really early, right? Correct?
Yeah.
What else?
Probably to the math.
No, don't say yeah. I want to test the brothers here. So it's really early. This first gathering after Ramadan, right, for the study of Quran. But most powerful factor, the key, the differentiator here, the litmus test is what? I'm telling you. Who knows? Brothers, mashallah, I knew it. None of you knows. There's a cricket match at 5:30.
Yeah.
Pakistan and India.
Yeah.
I said yesterday, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So they said, a few people, they said, watch out, nobody's going to show up. Nobody's going to show up today. I said, the loyal, devoted will show up. The loyal, devoted will show up, but the people who are clueless about cricket will show up. Indeed, the clueless about cricket have shown up. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen.
Billions are watching the match.
Billions. It's like the most
It's like
watched game in history. I should have not said this now. Right? Oh, the most exciting one. Oh yeah,
Yes,
alhamdulillah. I'm really
They're
impressed.
literally fighting over Twitter.
Allah Akbar, alhamdulillah. So the match is like 6 hours. So
Yeah, it's a long time.
so some people are relieved now that they know. Like I can go catch the game afterward. But may Allah bless you. Jazakallah khair for showing up. I was thinking like, who will show up? I had some names in mind, and they're all here. Alhamdulillah.
Jamal is not there.
Jamal is not here. So we all show up, but maybe sleepover came. I know actually some brothers are gathering at a place for the match. So that's serious business, man. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. We'll ask about the score later, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. But don't look at your phones. Alhamdulillah. Surah Al-Shu'ara. What an appropriate, befitting timing of studying this surah, that it comes after the month of Ramadan. The month of Ramadan was about the Quran. This is a surah entitled Shu'ara, Ash-Shu'ara, the poets. The poets. So the title, as we have described numerous times before, has rich meanings, and it's not randomly selected by Allah. Why is it called a Shu'ara, and why is that precise, beautiful timing of the surah that it was placed in our journey right now after the month of Ramadan? So it has to do with the Quran. This is a surah, the main theme of it is the Quran. And the month of Ramadan, as we said, is the Quran. We have to understand the power of the Quran, the healing nature of the Quran, and ultimately the operation of the Quran. A lot of people struggle because of not understanding the divine origin and the methodology of the Quran. They treat it like other normal books, and they fail in kind of syncing with the Quran because of this. We'll talk about this, inshallah. So ultimately, this is a surah whose essence and core is about the Quran and the nature and power of the Quran and its operation. But why is it called the poets? So in pre-Islamic Arabian culture, one of the major big kind of sources of entertainment, and a thing that really played a major role in the culture of people, was poetry, as we're aware. It constituted a major component of their art, of their culture, of their expression, of their entertainment. And it continues to after Islam. But subhanAllah, it was a very dominant force and a mode of expression among the Arabs. And they really excelled at it. But among the things that people kind of thought or believed at the time, because they understood poets, just as we kind of now got to know actors, right? Got to know singers. We know their story, we know what kind of moved them, we know their motivations, we know their business, right? And we kind of, people like to listen to music generally, but they know the ins and outs of music. It's not a secret anymore, is it? At the time, the beliefs that they had about poets, and this is a false belief, clearly, but this is their understanding, common understanding of the Arabs, is that poetry, the source of poetry was from jinn and shayateen, right? It didn't necessarily mean bad or good. They just assumed that it was from the shayateen. So there are some people who associated it with evil, but some people didn't. But nonetheless, the source of it in their imagination was that it came from the spirits, right? Sometimes evil, sometimes nasty spirits, sometimes good spirits, but it came from spirits. That's the source of it. So soon as the Quranic revelation came down, what did people say? What is one of the major charges against the Quran? Not because they want to embrace it, because they want to reject it. Is that they listened to it, they kind of they're not authentic. They started looking at things in the Quran that they can attack. People who open the Quran for the first time, like, I want to find what the issues here are with this so that I can attack it and discredit it. A lot of people approach the Quran that way. Many of them actually get guided at the end, right? It's the subhanAllah, the will of Allah Azza wa Jalla. But many don't. But they come with that assumption and they start to look for problems. So the kuffar of the time, who really, flipped out at the impact of this revelation on people, and it challenged their status quo, they were not happy. The elitists of Mecca the privileged class of Mecca were not happy, and they attacked it, starting with relatives of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they're looking for issues in it right away, and they didn't really take time to comprehend because they don't want to be guided. They reject it. So they looked at it and said, "Oh, this seems like it has some rhymes in it. Seems like it has some poetic nature to it. No, it's poetry. Let's attack it as something, a lot that it is ultimately something of a poetic origin, or has a poetic nature, to it. And let's spread that claim amongst the people. Why is that a problem? And what is in their head? Their head is that, okay, if it's poetry and people start to believe that it's poetry, then what's the origin of poetry? Evil spirits. See, so they automatically discredit the message and the messenger. What did they call the messenger? Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They said, let's think of things we can label him with, so we can completely undermine his reputation, and this, make others, cause him to totally dismiss him, right, and reject whatever he brings without even having to look at it. Let's call him what? A sorcerer, a magician, but also let's call him a poet. Because people understand poets just as we understand singers. So they like them, they get entertained by them, but they're not going to be ultimately impacted and influenced. And they're going to assume that it's evil, that it's from spirits, and spirits are lying, spirits are evil, etc., etc. And then the whole message is shattered. That's what this surah is about. So Allah Azza wa Jalla entitled it Ashsuar, right? He's going to address what specifically in this surah, given those charges against the Quran, he's going to describe the distinction. Why is this not poetry? How different is it from poetry? And what is the behavior of poets that really makes it, makes the case clear that this Quran cannot be poetry? So the whole surah is about this. It's an elaborate expose, right, and a description, beautiful description of the beauty of this Quran, and how people need to think about it and see it and analyze it and process it, as opposed to poetry. So Allah Azza wa Jal lays out few essential principles about the Quran, and I'm going to just go through them quickly, inshallah, and then go back and revisit with some of the passages of the surah, powerful passages of the surah. So Allah is going to describe the power of the Quran in this surah as distinguished from poetry, and He's going to highlight these elements and features and characteristics of the Quran, and He's going to show us in the surah the impact of the ayat, of the signs of Allah in general, but also the signs within the Quran and their impact on people. And He's going to describe to us the reactions of people when. He's talking, remember, to who? To the Arabs of the time, and then to all subsequent generations. So He's going to take us back into history and recount the stories of people who received what? Not the Quran, but revelations. Because all revelations are consistent, aren't they? They're consistent in their message, in their content, in their ultimate, essential goal, although the language itself is different, and so on and so forth. The style was different, the shari'ahs were different. But ultimately the goal and purpose were the same, right? And they were also consistent in what? In their source. The source of all revelations is what? Not spirits, but Allah. And Allah highlights in the surah as well that among the remarkable things that people can pick out of, can really grasp if they pay attention, if they really are objective, if they open their hearts, they can see remarkable consistency, not only in all the revelations, which really shows that if the source is one. What is this faith about? Tawheed. What is Tawheed? One. So beautiful, so simple. The source is one, the destination is one. The connecting power is one. Allah, Allah, Allah. And we're all interconnected. We're not separate, by the way. We're connected in profound ways. And we're connected to our source in a profound way. The one unifies everything. And the one is the one who saw all the revelations. So, if somebody authored, subhanAllah, I was looking, I look at, so there are some authors that I follow, and I look at, subhanAllah, a lot of their publications, and many of them just trying to make money. You know what they do with their books? They keep reprinting the same stuff and kind of reshuffle it a little bit. So you can tell who's the author. I mean, we know the style. SubhanAllah, what about Allah Azza wa Jal, right? Allah is without analogy. No one can be compared to Allah Azza wa Jal. But you're going to find remarkable what? Consistency in His revelation, in His guidance. It cannot be like the guidance of Musa is different than the guidance for Isa or Ibrahim. Same message, same essence. It has to be. So Allah shows us now through stories of prophets in the surah. He's going to recount the stories of multiple prophets of Allah to show us that the revelation, that the guidance of Allah that came to them was consistent in its message, but was also consistent in what? In producing similar, consistent reactions from people. Either some believed and others did what? Rejected. And why did they reject? Allah tells us what? All of them, consistent. So He's showing us also consistency in human behavior. Because they're all liars. That those who really reject, by the way, there are people who are honest, and they're really not convinced. But many are not. Many really reject and resist revelation. Why? Because they don't want to resist. They don't want to follow it. So they start to come up with excuses, right? Manipulate things, and so on and so forth. But they're not honest. They really want to reject them. Allah calls them atham, kadhab. They're liars. They're fabricators. And Allah shows us throughout the stories of these prophets that all those who rejected the messages of the prophets were just fabricators and liars. Remarkable consistency. So Allah demonstrates this in the surah and then wraps up the surah by a message to the messenger, who's the messenger carrying the Quran, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Because what happened to him emotionally? He was troubled by what he was seeing. He was troubled by the hostility from people who were supposed to be receiving this with love and joy and happiness, that they're being sent something to enlighten them and raise them up and save them. And instead, you meet me with the love that I'm showing you, with my care, with the divine message that I bring you for your transformation, with hostility. So Prophet Muhammad was sad by this. And he was sad that the fate of these people will be like who? The fate of the prior nations. Consistency. Allah shows us in the surah that not only were the reactions consistent throughout history, but that the outcomes were also consistent. What were the outcomes? Those who resisted, Allah shows us in the surah, every single nation that resisted the guidance of Allah, what happened to them at the end? Perished, destroyed, consistent. No other outcome. They're dealing with Allah Al-Aziz, the powerful one, who is also Ar-Rahman, the most merciful, but He's also Aziz. His decision is the ultimate. His will is the ultimate. Nobody can overcome it, right? So they met the same fate over and over. So He wraps up the surah beautifully by talking to the Prophet ﷺ to calm him down and to tell him what? Don't kill yourself. Don't be sad. Don't grieve to the point where you perish, because it's ultimately the will of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And Allah does not force people. Allah does not compel wills of people. Allah guides. And Allah gave us choice. And He made us different than the angels in that we have what? The ability to make decisions and make choices about things, right? We have will, subhanAllah. And this is a distinctive feature of the human being. Distinctive feature of the human being. So Allah chose it to be as such. So don't kill yourself. Do your part, which is what? Remind the guides. Remind and guide, and don't worry about them. Turn to who? Your source, and rely on them. Because there's no power except with Allah. And no one can prevent harm that can come to you except Allah. They have no power, no control over everything. Look at the prior nations. And He wraps up the surah beautifully by declaring to all of us the nature of poetry, right? That especially poetry, and we're going to talk about poetry a little bit more, because, is this a declaration in the surah that poetry is haram, for example? Believe it or not, some people look at the surah and say, poets are messed up. They're horrible. Because Allah says, وَالشُّعَرَاءُ يَتَّبِعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ. The poets, Allah says in this surah, are followed by the deluded. So only the people who are deluded follow the poets. Some people take this verse very seriously and they misinterpret it. And they really start to actually claim that all poets are misguided. because Allah sent us a surah that condemned poets. Is this really a condemnation of poetry and poets? How do you answer that?
They were companions.
Exactly, they're companions of the Prophet ﷺ were poets. They actually furthered the cause of the faith with poetry. Poetry is like music, like any art, like any mode of expression, like even language. Just general, it's ultimately an expression, mode of expression, isn't it? Just as television, that's just internet. It's an instrument. Before Islam, what was it? Allah says, these poets before Islam were wandering without aim, without purpose. They just wanted to entertain. That's it. Because of this, and there was oftentimes, not all of them, many of them didn't have any moral message to them. Many did. But they're ultimately, even if they were good in their poetry, the source was not Allah's. They're not inspired by the faith. Does it make sense? So Allah's condemning those who use poetry as such, who are not concerned with the moral upbringing of people and so on and so forth, right? And they kind of manipulated people with their poetry. There are many poets who seek to do nothing but please the political power. Isn't it true? Like those who would just sing the tunes of the people in authority. You know, they just use poetry as well, right? So Allah Azza wa Jalla is addressing those specifically. But notice what happened with poetry after the emergence of Islam. What happened with poetry? Poetry is beautified, right? The style has even changed. So the kind of the tools of poetry were the same, but the message of it changed. And that's why we have companions of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ who themselves were very inspired and talented in their poetry, but they altered their message completely. That poetry now became a tool, an instrument of what? Of raising people up, of actually helping people be guided, of enlightening hearts and souls, of soothing. So poetry is a beautiful thing, just as any mode of art, that any expression of tool, artistic tool that we have, it can be used for good, it can be used for bad. But that Islam itself and the Quranic message and revelation purifies things, beautifies things, just as it did with poetry. And the evidence is there in history. So let's highlight a few things that this surah said before we get into some of the content of it. Allah Azza wa Jal talks about, again, the distinction between the Quran and poetry. So among the things that he says, and he's talking to now the minds of everyone. He says, okay, you call this poetry. Let's now analyze why this is not poetry. Because it has to be clear in the minds of people. And there are people who will still resist this. Allah Azza wa Jal tells us what is ultimately, the message source. Let's talk about source. Where did, again, we kind of touched on this. Where did poetry come from in the minds and in the imagination of people before Islam? They claim that it came from spirits. Allah asks clearly in this surah, where did the Quran come from? Did it come from evil spirits? Right? People claim it. Allah affirmed. Allah first of all has to declare where it came from. So that it's clear in the minds of people, and then He'll explain to us why it came from there and what is the proof that it came from there. Allah says it came from none but Allah. It came from none but Allah. So the source is heavenly and it's not evil spirits. But how do we know that it's that? How do we know that it came from Allah Azza wa Jal? The source is God. People that were even confused about what God is and the nature of God. So Allah Azza wa Jal says, okay, let's take you there. What do evil spirits do? What do these jinn do? Right? How do you know what their intentions are? Look at the effect of their works. Isn't it true? Look at the effect of their actions. What have they done with people? Study the impact of their message on people. What have they done? People who follow evil spirits. What happens to them? Do you notice they get corrupted? So the poetry before Islam and those who played with it didn't necessarily produce goodness in society, did they? They did not produce goodness. They produced a lot of mischief, distraction, corruption as well, consistent with the actions of society. Make sense? Allah Azza asks us beautifully in this surah. Look at the impact of this powerful revelation on people. What has it done to people? This is the revelation that made Umar ibn al-Khattab what? Turn from somebody who was drunkard, abuser, who used his strength to subjugate others, and ultimately wanted to kill Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with his rage. He was such a blind man with a revelation, touched by a few verses, turned into the greatest of the believers. But not only this, he didn't just have this faith in his heart. He became an instrument of justice throughout history. And the evidence, the impact on his heart is evident in his life. How can someone literally turn from death to life overnight? Except that this had to have come from a source, divine, that is truth, right? That has really created. It's Allah who created. Only Allah and His message can do this. So Allah is asking us to evaluate the Quran by its outcome. The outcome on the hearts of people, brothers and sisters, within the span of a few years. The very people who were burying their daughters in Mecca turned into, subhanAllah, the greatest in history and produced a civilization like no other within what? Not 200, 300 years. Within a decade. How has this happened? It's impossible, actually. Impossible, except that they were guided and enlightened by something divine. So I always ask people, we have to use these also beautiful insights in talking to people. Because people start to analyze words and get caught up with certain verses and get entangled by them and start to, poor thing, like many people just struggle and they don't understand how to understand the Quran, right? And they might trip up on a few verses because they don't understand them and then reject the whole Quran. Our children, many of them do this, so we have to help them understand that. Let's look at the impact of this beautiful. Before we even visit verses, what is the impact of this Quran when it came? Because there's no other way to understand the power of the Quran except to look at the evidence of its impact. So Allah asks us, look at the beautification. Look at how it raised people up. Look at how it civilized them. It made them good. It made them moral. It made them upright. Now the question is, can something evil in its source produce such good? Of course not. Because evil is concerned with what? Evil. Evil is concerned with corruption, misguidance, spreading mischief, creating problems, making people follow their desires. Does this do this? Allah is asking very objectively, does this do this? How about if you look at the content of the Quran? It's another argument. Allah says, look at the moral content of the Quran. Look at the beautiful ethical message of the Quran. Look at the remarkable consistency in its goodness. Does it call you to anything bad? Does it call you to break your relationships with your parents? Does it call you to cheat? It's all about establishing the balance. It's all about respecting Allah's earth. It's all about calling your mind to think and to turn to the one and not to turn to false idols and false gods, right? It's calling us and summoning us to beautiful, beautiful things. And Allah says, read for yourself and judge for yourself. Another proof that indeed the Quran is not poetry and did not originate from poets. I don't even need to look at the verse. I just need to look at the impact and the general message. And the conclusion is very obvious. Allah further tells us in this surah, at the end of it, as a remarkable point to reflect on, he says to the Prophet ﷺ, trying to find the verse. Okay. Allah Azza wa says, نَزَلَ بِهِ الرُّوحُ الْأَمِينُ. Allah Azza wa says about this Quran, it's not, okay, the source of it is not these evil spirits. But who delivered it to? We understand, Allah declared, the source is Allah Azza wa Jalla. And who did He assign because of the beauty, because of the worth of the Quran, because of the preciousness of the Quran? Because the Quran is the ultimate revelation. Allah declared it to be the ultimate revelation. And Allah called it the light, the guide, the healer. It's Allah's wisdom in it. Beauty. There's nothing like it. So it was especially protective. So who did He assign to send the Quran to us? To the prophets. Jibreel, the best of the angels. نَزَلَ بِهِ الرُّوحُ الْأَمِينُ. So He says, sure, there is a spirit involved that delivered it. Not the source of it. That delivered it, assigned by Allah, and is the best of angels. It's called Ruh. Ruh means spirit, but it's a reference to who? When you read in the Quran, Ruh al-Amin, you understand it's who? Jibreel. And Allah called him Amin. What is Amin? Trustworthy. There's no one like him because it's so precious. It's divine. It has to be protected and saved. And Allah is the ultimate protector. But He creates and employs agents to carry out His work, right, in creation. Allah says, I have the best of the angels deliver this Quran to the heart of Prophet Muhammad. So if you're not clear about what spirits are involved in delivering this beautiful revelation. What else does Allah Azza wa Jalla talk about as a distinction between poetry and the Quran? He talks about the process of revelation. He talks about what the process of revelation. This is a point also that trips up people pretty badly. And I need to just also I'm looking at the verse. Give me 1 second, inshallah. Can't find the verse that I'm looking for. Okay. So Allah Azza says in this surah that indeed نزل به الروح الأمين, right? The trustworthy spirit, Angel Jibreel alayhi salam, is the one that delivered it. But where did he deliver? So what Allah Azza is now talking about is the process of revelation. Here's where people trip up. People look at the Quran and they want to evaluate the content and the message and see if this is really indeed divine, right? If this makes sense, if it's something that we want to follow, we got it by. So how do they analyze the Quran? Typically, people, especially coming from intellectual background, they open this book and they treat it as what? Like what?
Like a piece of literature.
The piece of literature. Jazakallah khair, Javed. Like exactly like a human piece of literature. They think that it has to be sequential, right? It has to follow a traditional, typical human logic to be read as such, like a piece of literature, and it has to match the characteristics of a piece of literature because we human beings are so poor, we define our logic to be the ultimate logic. We don't recognize that we're creators. We think we're creators, right? We are we become the standard, so to speak. Our thoughts become the thoughts of truth, right? So whatever we produce is the ultimate reference. So people literally start to do this. They start to try to match the Quran to the norms and the standards of literature. And what happens to them when they do this? They're going to notice it doesn't match that. For example, you see in the Quran a lot of repetition. You see a lot of bouncing back and forth. You see a story not told in its entirety. Are stories told in their entirety in the Quran in one place? There's one story that is as such. Which one? Yusuf, the only surah where the entire story of a prophet was placed in one chapter. We shouldn't even be calling them chapters. You notice what I just did? I'm following just the norms we've created with our own literature, so I call them chapters. Shouldn't call them chapters. It's not chapter. It's a poor translation of surah. But that's what we have, right? That's the tool we have, the instrument, the linguistic instrument that we have. But it's really poor because it produces certain conclusions in our heads. So it cannot be read logically. What you notice is that the stories are used by Allah Azza wa Jalla to deliver certain lessons. So Allah will pick a portion of the life of Musa alayhi salam to address particular lessons in that particular place in the Quran. Then He will pick another part, perhaps from an earlier part of the life of Musa alayhi salam, in a later chapter. So you say, wait a minute, why did He say the end here, but later in the Quran He said the beginning? Why is this so confused? You literally hear people saying this is so confused. Why does He keep repeating? Why is this verse this way here, talking about His life, but it's the same thing here, but the words are flipped? And they start to trip up on this. They're not understanding this is not sequential. This is not a piece of human literature. This is addressing not only your mind, but it's addressing what? Your heart. It's operating with you through divine means. And it's divine logic, not human logic. So people who come to it with assumptions are going to trip up. And I cannot tell you how much this happens, even from personal experience. You have to let go of these assumptions to really be able to understand the power of the Quran. So what Allah says in this surah is that this Quran has divine source. It's pure truth. It was delivered by this trustworthy angel.
To where? He says to the Prophet, and pay attention, on your heart. Say, wait a minute, what does that mean? He didn't say mind. How was the Quran delivered, brothers and sisters? Allah Azza wa Jalla, when He prepared Prophet Muhammad for the message, how did He prepare? He had him retreat in the cave for a very long time. To prepare what? His heart. Why? What do you mean? You say, well, I hear the Quran, so it doesn't overwhelm my heart. It doesn't necessarily cause me to just be stunned. Yeah, because our hearts are not necessarily ready. If we are really ready, this Quran overwhelms. And what does Allah say about it in Surah Al-Hashr? لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. He says that this Quran, if you really open your heart to it and really understand and really start to let it do its work on you, if it was revealed onto a mountain, it would have caused it to really break down. Right? The power of the Quran, divine revelation. That's how it works. So the initial point of contact of the Quran for it to produce its effect, the way it operates from the divine source to earth, to human beings, is from the source, Al-Lawh al-Mahfuz. It was carried from the angels, from the preserved tablet, the lowest heaven, and from there, the angel Jibril carried it by the will of Allah, and according to the timing of Allah, to earth. But where specifically did He just imagine? Did He just bring a piece of paper and sit the Prophet next to him and say, "Hey, say after me"? Let's just. Did He say it this way? No, it didn't. By the way, it wasn't revealed like this. How was it revealed? We have no idea. There was an interaction with Jibril alayhi salam, and the words were recited somehow onto the heart of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What do we hear about what happened to him when revelation came down? What happened to his forehead? It was sweat. The Prophet ﷺ tells us that he used to hear this ringing bell sound that is so powerful, it stunned him. It was overwhelming. It was sad. He would break into sweat. He would become actually heavy. A prophet, a companion of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, one day, I was sitting next to the Prophet ﷺ and they were really close, and the leg of the Prophet ﷺ, his thigh was leaning on the leg of the companion. And he said, subhanAllah, when revelation came down, the companions knew, because the Prophet ﷺ would be silent, and then he would break into these sweats, and he would be overwhelmed. He says his leg was about to crush me. It became so heavy. How? What's that? How does Quran into a heart cause the body to be heavy? We have no idea. It's in a realm beyond our imagination. So what's happening in that moment? Quran is being what? Poured into his heart, not mind. Into his heart. SubhanAllah, in a process that is divine beyond our comprehension. And he had to now process it within his heart by the power of Allah Azza wa Jalla. If it was just recited to him, and the Prophet then took it to recite it to us, there will be none of the effect that we see. This is the process of revelation and inspiration. So it had to really literally become part of the spirit of Prophet Muhammad, like literally mingle with his heart. And then when it was really internalized by this process, he would wake up from this and start to do what? Recite. Is it coming from his mind? It's coming from where? His heart. SubhanAllah. In what language did he now deliver? بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ. He says that the third step in the process of inspiration and revelation is now for this messenger who's been touched and inspired within his heart by this message, that this message became part of that heart, right? He now starts to communicate it to creation through a language they understand. But because of that language came not out of just an intellect, came out of a heart that was touched by divine revelation and mingled itself with it by the power of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Now the words he conveys have spirit to them, have ruh in them. So they're not just talking to minds, they're talking to what? Hearts. And they move hearts. Now that's why it's able to change Umar ibn al-Khattab and Abu Bakr and Ali, turn them into giants. SubhanAllah. People open their hearts as such, and they really listened to the revelation, it will do that to them. But if they treat it as a piece of literature, through just intellect, it doesn't necessarily, you don't get there. It's a process as well. It will guide you if you open your heart. but it's really ultimately understanding it's a message for the mind and the heart as well, and begins with the heart. Make sense? So Allah Azza wa Jalla talks about all of this in this beautiful surah. Let's inshallah go back and start and pick some verses, inshallah, and passages to kind of reflect on. One more thing actually I want to mention, one of the beauties of the surah, is that when Allah Azza wa Jalla addresses the stories of the prophets before, He tells us the stories to draw these highlights about, remember, the nature of revelation, the consistency. Because people rejected the Quran and he said, okay, let me take you back into history and show you the power of revelation, how consistent it was, how it changed people, but also the consistent reactions and the hostility and what happened to people who were hostile. And by the way, you're calling this poetry. So Allah Azza does two things in the stories, and this is going to be one of the distinctive features of this surah. So for example, he'll talk about, let's say, he'll begin with Musa, then he'll talk about Ibrahim, then he'll talk about Nuh alayhi salam. So let me show you what he says about, 1 second, inshallah. Okay. End of surah, end of the passage about Musa alayhi salam. Pay attention to it. Keep this in mind. You can make a mental note. 68. When he wraps up the story about Musa alayhi salam, actually, let me look at the beginning. No, let's look at the end. He says, وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. And indeed, your Lord, Allah Azza wa Jal, is Aziz. What does Aziz mean? Aziz means, by the way, is uniquely powerful. Aziz, Azza Shay. Azza means really, it became rare, something rare and unique. But and specifically here, it's referencing the power of Allah Azza wa Jal. He's Aziz, right?
Like mighty.
Mighty, powerful, right? And who also is what? Rahim. If it wasn't merciful, he wouldn't send us this. He cares so much. People miss this point. So he combines both. So he says, and then he says, "What alayhim?" So tell them the story, tell them the news of Ibrahim, and then at the end of Surah Ibrahim, and the passage about Ibrahim, verse 104, وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ 2. Then begins the passage about Nuh saying, كَذَّبَتْ قَوْمُ نُوحٍ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. The people of Nuh, the tribe of Nuh, did takdeeb. They lied and they denied the messengers. And then he tells us what happened with Musa and them in their encounter. And then he wraps it up by saying, verse 140, وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ, you tell him, لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. The next one is Thamud, right? And Allah Azza wa Jal is going to talk to us about Salih, Prophet Salih and Thamud. How does he begin it? كَذَّبَتْ ثَمُودُ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. Same beginning? Oh, Thamud. So Nuh's people lied and rebelled. The beginning of the passage about Thamud and Salih. The people of Thamud, they lied and denied the messenger. Subhanallah. And then wraps up with what? This is the fourth instance. Where is it? Verse 175. Right? وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. Then he's going to talk to us about Shu'aib and his people. How do you think it begins? كَذَّبَ أَصْحَابُ الْأَيْكَةِ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. And at the end of it, وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ, verse 191, وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. And then ends. How does it sound to you, first of all? Poetic. Isn't that amazing? It's very poetic. There's a remarkable rhyme and a meter to the surah. But it's not to just tell them, hey, by the way, I'm poetry here, right? It's to strike the mind of the Arab at the time. I say, when I really hear special divine poetry, hear this. That's number one. But he's also asking, you see, that's when we talked about the content and the impact, to differentiate this divine poetry from human poetry. Makes sense, right? But also, why is he doing this metering? Why is he doing this rhyming? Because Allah doesn't just, brothers and sisters, talk randomly. There's purpose to his talk. There's intention. There's a goal. There's an impact. You know, people who just talk nonsense. That's what poets do. Yeah, let's just have fun, entertain, waste time, right? Allah doesn't. There's not a random letter in His language. And it's designed to produce outcomes, change in enlightened people, etc. Right? So when He begins each passage by kadaba, 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 these people lied against the messengers. And then He tells us what happens to them, they perish. And then the end of the passage is, and Allah is the most mighty, the most merciful. Kadaba, and then the most mighty, most merciful. What do you notice about this? Even if you're like a kindergarten kid, there's a lot of what? Similarity. So the whole story in the life of Noah and his people, the whole story of the life of Salih and Thamud, the whole story of Musa and Fir'aun is wrapped up with they perish and Allah is mighty. Allah is merciful. The story of Ibrahim, they perish and Allah is mighty. The story of Shu'aib and his people, they perish and Allah is mighty. Allah says, do you see any other outcomes? How about change now, right? Like, when are you going to believe that its source is Allah? There's no other way that you could have seen this remarkable consistency, right? In the stories of all the prophets, they didn't even see each other, right? And in the reactions of people, and in the outcome and what happened to them. Allah says, I'll wrap up the whole story in 2 verses. Kadhabu, they perished, and what happened? Allah triumphs at the end. Do you see any other outcome? What a beautiful, even start to the surah, right? And you often see this in the Quran, feature of the Quran. Allah wraps up the whole surah in few verses at the end. Pay attention to them. That becomes the ultimate lesson and insight that we have to draw. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in the details. We forget what the details are about. The details are about lessons. And what is the lesson? Allah's one. Allah's the only one you have. Allah's beautiful. Allah's perfect. Allah's powerful, and there's no power but His power. And Allah's the most merciful, and there is no mercy like His mercy. Turn and rely on Allah Azza, and don't worry. And you're going back to Allah Azza. And this is your healer. You cannot be guided without it. Here it is. That's what Allah said. There are those who keep rejecting this despite seeing evidence over and over and over that if you resist this, you're not going to do well. And you're gonna be misguided, subhanAllah. This is what the surah is ultimately about. So inshallah, a few verses that we'll talk about. Surah Al-Shu'ara begins with the declaration that tilka ayatul kitab al-mubin. Remember, this is a chapter about what? The Quran. Allah says, beginning this surah, tilka, these are the evident signs of this manifest. The evident manifest signs of this book. Remember, manifest, beautiful. These signs produce incredible outcomes on your hearts. So Allah is declaring it as a distinction from poetry. Then He says, who is concerned now with the reactions of people? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and what happened to his heart? Because he was so human. He was so affectionate. He was so caring. Remember, he was a special heart. The heart of a teacher. Brothers and sisters, look at what happened to teaching nowadays. People who stand in front of students, their heads are concerned about research, money, and the people in front of them mean nothing. There are many teachers, not all. There are people who are really blessed. They're treating it as just an intellectual endeavor. That's it. But even those who care, supposedly, they say, I want to teach you, make you understand. Do they necessarily care in their heart? Maybe some do, majority don't. The best of teachers are ones who do what? Carry a message. Let's say intellectual message, but their hearts are what? Concerned with upbringing the students, their growth. They have a relationship with them. They become mentors. Not everybody should be called a teacher. Not everybody should be called an educator, right? Because if they lack that intention of care and affection for their students, they're not going to be raised the same way. Impossible. And by the way, try to remember, we often have this teacher in our heads that really had an impact on us, right? Every single one. I know if I ask you to tell me the one teacher in your childhood that you really loved, and the picture's there, you'll have one at least. Isn't that true? True? Not? Anybody can shake their head? True? Okay. True. SubhanAllah. And all the other nonsense that happened. And there are people like, I remember growing up, they used to hit us too. It was rough, right? I don't know how many of you got hit. Anybody? True. Yeah? Am I the only one here? Is that it? And everybody's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about, Brother Tariq. Tell the truth, don't worry. We can stop the recording. Yeah? SubhanAllah. I'm like, how do you teach with that? Smack you. Make a mistake, smack you, right? SubhanAllah, we ravage the profession. It's not a profession, it's a mission, right? The best teacher is Prophet Muhammad. Why? Because he was a mercy. Rahman al-alamin. And he cared so much, he was so concerned with the fate of everybody that he used to like kill himself with grief. So Allah says to him, لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُ مُؤْمِنِينَ. Don't. You're about to kill yourself for them to become believers. Now why shouldn't you kill yourself? Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us beautifully in the Quran, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَآمَنَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا أَفَأَنْتَ تُكْرِهُ النَّاسَ أَنْ يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ حَتَّى يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah says, it's my will. First of all, if Allah wanted to coerce us, we would have become angels. Because I get this question a lot. Why didn't Allah make us angels? Well, if Allah made us angels, then there's no story. Right? It's done. You wouldn't even be asking me this question. So clearly Allah had the wisdom because He already has a model of that. He's already done that. He has created angels without will. And they do exactly as Allah tells them. And some people say, why then He didn't make us as such? It's His wisdom. It's His knowledge that we cannot comprehend. He made a decision. He's the creator to set up a different reality, a new reality, with a new creation that is endowed with what? Choice. Because Allah wants to be, not that He needs it, Allah wants to be worshipped, not just because you have to, because your nature dictates that, but because you choose to. And that becomes better than what the angels do. Make sense? Even the angels are confused. Like, Allah, why are you putting people who are corrupt earth? Allah says, I know that which you do not know. These people, when they make a choice, they're going to become even greater than the angels. SubhanAllah. The most beautiful thing is for you to worship Allah by your choice, not because Baba and Mama told you. Right? There's nothing like it. And it's so beautiful to Allah that as we hear in the hadith, that a man who just teared because he had a moment with Allah when he remembered Allah, or she remembered Allah, is under the shade of Allah. One moment. One moment in his life or her life where they stood with Allah and they shed a tear. Can you imagine? They're in Jannah. This is how Allah looks at us. And we think it's our actions. No, it's the mercy of Allah. But Allah is looking for just any evidence from you to show your affection to Allah. It means everything to Allah because you choose to. Right? So he told the Prophet, don't worry. And then he says, if I willed, I would have made everybody a mu'min. Right? He already made the angels like this. But it's a decision of Allah. So at the end of it, and Allah is aware, He says, وَمَا أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتَ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. He says, at the end of all your work, the majority of people, will they be believers? No, they won't be believers. And Allah, by the way, then you start saying, then it's okay. So the non-believer, it's okay. So not believing is okay. No. Allah is not saying this. Allah is saying most people will choose not to become believers. So you leave that to Allah. That's not your responsibility. لا يكلف الله نفسا. That's how Allah doesn't burden you beyond your capacity. First, you have to care. You have to care about the fate of people. Right? You have to do your best to guide them, to help them, to heal them, etc., etc. But then what happens at the end is the business of Allah. The hearts are not in your hand or my hand. Do you have much control over our children? Look at it. We do so much with them. But like, subhanAllah, what a difficult formula. Evidence. Allah is humbling us. Allah says, it's not you. It's ultimately Allah's work. And Allah knows best. So He's telling the Prophet, calm down. Do your part. Right? Continue to care, remind and guide people, turn it to Allah. And Allah controls hearts, and Allah guides hearts. Don't worry about what happens there. It's a beautiful message to Prophet Muhammad. And for all of us, that we need to really carry that beautiful spirit of trust in Allah. As we do our work, understanding the hearts of our family members, spouses, parents, children, community, are in the hands of Allah. You cannot coerce. You cannot compel. You cannot force. Imagine now the actions of people who now kill in the name of faith. Wow. You're actually saying to Allah, you don't know what you're doing. Because they're kuffar. Allah's telling the Prophet ﷺ, majority will not be. So, and he says, أَفَأَنْتَ تُكْرِهُ النَّاسَ? Are you forcing people to become believers? Literally, we have people now in all religions who want to force others. Literally, if you, because, you're the enemy. Allah never talks like this. And that's not the methodology of Allah. So Allah Azza wa Jalla goes on to talk to us about the impact and a portion of the story of Musa alayhi salam. And we don't have time to go over these stories, just kind of highlights. He talks to us about the encounter ultimately with the magician and Fir'aun, right? But he specifically talks about something that happened within the heart of Musa. He received revelation, correct? Remember the work of revelation? How does it work? Delivered by the angel onto who? By Jibreel, onto what? The heart of the messenger. How was the heart of Musa initially? Allah described it as a heart that was afraid. Afraid of what? When Allah told him, go meet Fir'aun, he said, what? Fir'aun? How do I handle that conversation? The hard conversation. And the guy is a tyrant. He kills. He was afraid. So Allah sent him signs to embolden him. He gave him the sign of the stick that turned into a snake, and he told him, put your hand under your arm and bring it out. It was dark, it became light. Like he was stunned. But also the revelation was working his heart. What was the outcome? What happened to his fear? It slowly began to what? To vanish. What was the work? That was the work of what? Allah's work. Revelation on the heart. So Allah showed us how when you start to trust Allah and allow the signs of Allah and His revelation to touch your heart, you're going to start to overcome what? Your fear, your anxieties. It heals you. So Allah healed even the temper of Musa alayhi salam. And some people say, why does the messenger have a temper? It's a work of Allah. Allah wants to show us that even the messenger had temper, but also had what? Listen. This is always stuns me. The messenger's mission is to talk. And then he sends us one of the best messengers, and he had a problem in articulation. It's like if you chose me for a job, don't you just give me the skills so that I don't stumble on myself? Allah says it's not your tongue. Because sometimes we get confused. Like, if I knew this, if I had the intelligence of Chavez, I'll know how to talk philosophy better. Well, that's not what Allah gave you. And it's not really that. Do your part. Recognize your gift. Do what you can with them. The rest is on who? Allah. It's not your tongue. We stumble, Allah, in ourselves. We think it's our intelligence, our calculations, our tongues. No, do your part. You have to do that. Musa struggled with his tongue. He says, Allah, just can you untie the knot of my tongue that I can do my work? That's it. He didn't complain. Say, Allah, you could have given me a tongue like my brother Harun. But he didn't. And Allah deliberately chose this. And He wants to teach all of us, it's not the tongue. When you have that sincerity with Allah, do your part. Use your resources. Allah is the one who determines outcomes and will make you successful in your work. If you start to rely on yourself, you're relying on something so finite. And Allah can take the resource anytime away. Isn't it true? Anytime. And Allah wants to humble us to make us understand He is the source. He is the source. So we see now Musa being transformed and emboldened, and he overcomes his fear. Allah says, look at the work of revelation on hearts, what it can do to you. Beautiful. So at the end of it, Musa would be saying things like, Akhafu, ay Allah, I'm afraid. At the end of the passage, at the end of the story, when he was about, when Fir'aun and his army was chasing him, and the sea was in front of him, and the army was behind him, what happened to the people around Musa? They freaked out. Normal reaction. Inna lamudrakun. Verse 61. They said, oh Musa, we're about to be what? Captured and killed. That's it. They're about to arrest us, detain us. Khalas, it's over. We have no way to escape. What was his reaction? At the beginning of the story, how would he reacted? How would he have reacted? You're right. We're done. Right? But because Allah described him, fearful. How did he react at the end? Verse 62. قال كلا إن معي ربي سيهدي. I'm aware of something big that I've seen the evidence of. He straightened his eyes and said, no, don't worry. Even though the enemies in front of them are about to just like unleash on them, they're seeing them, right? Ma'ya, with me is Allah right now, and He will guide to the opening. He doesn't see the opening, but He's with Allah. That moment of recognition, brothers and sisters, is what this whole message is about. You know, when we study this, we come for you to right now just recognize Allah's with me. But not just a God. Allah who's so caring, so merciful, He's the only source of power and healing. And He really can make things happen right now. Brothers and sisters, if you have that thought and you really are convinced of it and you see it in that moment, you're transformed. You will not see problems or fears, and you'll calm down for sure. And Allah will start to open doors for you and you'll see it. This is what this is about. All to come to that realization. That's why we do dhikr. You know why we do dhikr? Why we have to keep saying subhanallah? For you to remind your mind to bring your thoughts from fear and anxiety back to Allah as the source. Allah's perfect. Allah's with me. Allah's with me. Allah's with me. Calms you down. Strengthens you. That's what the message is about. Allah showed it to us. And then He tells us, look at what happened to Fir'aun. Drowned completely. وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. Allah says, do you need more evidence for you to calm down? Allah triumphs overall, and this is the nature of revelation. Nobody can defeat revelation. No one. And that's another characteristic. Then He goes on to talk to us about Ibrahim. Same story. All of them had to encounter difficulties. And his own father gave him trouble. So here is the reaction again. Reaction of people is to disbelieve in Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim was concerned for them. And he wanted to teach them as well. So what does Allah highlight about him? Something so beautiful that I want you now to pay attention to in this surah. And it's a beautiful way of teaching. I come, subhanAllah, a lot of the, especially young people, actually young and old, a lot of young people struggle with this. Because we're not raised to know Allah. So they'll come and ask the questions like, why is this verse this way? I'm having doubts. And many of them, I'll be honest with you, they don't consider themselves Muslims even. But they'll be they'll tripping up on verses. So they say, I have this verse that says this, but woman, this verse and this, and there's inconsistency between this verse and this verse, so I'm confused, I don't know how to believe in this. You know why I draw my lessons in answering these questions from? Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Here it is. SubhanAllah. In verse 70, when he says to his father, because his father's like, we're gonna kill you if you don't change your way. He says, قال لأبيه وقومي وما تعبدون ما تعبدون. What are you worshiping? So what did he do? Instead of being caught up with this verse and that verse, what did he point him to? Who are you worshiping? Do you know who you worship? I don't address questions like that. Like when they come to me, it's like I don't say, that verse, that answer. Because when they have an answer for this, what they're gonna do next? What is it? Exactly, barakallah fi. They're gonna go to the next doubt. So I tell them, by the way, this is a non-ending kind of cycle. We're not gonna finish that, right? We can be sitting hours and gonna come to me tomorrow and the day after with new set of doubts. Because you're not grounded. You didn't ask the fundamental question. Let go of the Quran, put it aside. Let's talk about you and where you came from. How about that as a question? Brothers and sisters, if we don't start the conversations with our children, community, with Allah first, we're going to trip up. Because we can't. If you don't know your source, how are you going to believe in anything He says? The first fundamental question, does it even exist in your mind? The first question that I address with people, when they come to me with a question, when I see them struggling and they're not, they don't believe, is let's talk whether God exists. And then when they're convinced of this, I take them to the second question, what's His nature? Because there are many people who believe in God, but their gods are human. Their gods are multiple. Their gods are fighting in a war, I always say God of thunder and God of rain, right? And I say, is that acceptable? Let's analyze it, you tell me. I swear to you, young people open their hearts and they really become objective, they'll start saying no, no, no. And then to one God, yes, yes, yes. And a God who's so beautiful and perfect, yes, yes, yes. It's so beautiful, so profound, so logical. It's not even about, the mind even sees it, and the heart sees it. Then we'll talk about, okay, what did he send? Right? Now, because now if I struggle with a verse, I can attribute it back to who? He's wise. And I don't know. I cannot come up with answers for everything. You cannot come up with answers for it. It's impossible. So I draw the analogy of a parent and a child. I say, well, the parent knows a lot more than the child. If the child didn't know the parent, first of all, they're not going to listen to anything. But the father and the mother ultimately ask the child to trust them. I can't explain to you why you have to go to bed at 9 o'clock. It's good for you. They say, no, it's not. But you have to go to bed at 9 o'clock, right? You have to go to school. No, I don't have to go to school. I know everything. The 5-year-old will tell you I know everything. No, you don't know anything. But he cannot see it. She can't see it. They have to grow older to say, when they have children, they'll get it. True? If you are struggling with explaining the nature of God, draw the lesson or the analogy of a father, mother, and a child. Every single person I share this with, they say, finally I see it. You cannot know everything. You have to trust. So when I struggle now with a verse, I can say, I'm going to let go of God altogether, of everything just because of a verse. Because we already accepted that he exists. So so that's why you have to establish principles first. If they're convinced God exists and there's no problem, because the alternative makes no sense. Correct? And it has to be beautiful, it has to be one. Then if I struggle with a verse, it's like me struggling with a command of my parent. I say, well, I don't know, Shabbat, Baba. I don't like what you're saying, so you don't exist. You're like, what? How do you go from, I don't like what you're saying, to I deny you? Does that make sense? Total foolishness. Yet people do it all the time. But if I accepted him, and he's beautiful, now I have to trust things he says. A lot of things I'm going to understand. A lot of things I'm not going to understand, and it's okay. Because if I have all the answers, then I'm like the parent. But I'm not the parent. And I cannot assume that I know everything now. That means I'm so arrogant. But I'm not really thinking about my ego. So people need to be reminded that they're human, that they cannot know everything. When they establish these principles, now we can what? Go address what? The verses. See the process? Ibrahim did this. You don't have Quran with them. But he says, who's your Lord? Because they're not thinking. They're just worshiping things. Then he says to them, well, let me tell you this. He says, why are you following? Why are you doing things like this way? They said, no, we're following our gods. He says, these are really gods? Why are you following these gods? They say, because our parents did, so they're not thinking. And he says to them, look at this, 72. قال هل يسمعونكم إذ تدعون? He says, okay, I want you to think. He says, are they hearing you when you call them? Are they benefiting you or harming you? They said, no, but we found our parents doing this. He says, aren't you seeing what you're worshiping? You and your fathers and your mothers before you, they're indeed all these things that you worship. Aduun li, verse 77. He says, these are all enemies of you and me, except the one. These gods, false gods, are all enemies. They don't do anything. They cannot do anything, right? But they're harming you because you took them up as gods. All are enemies except which God? The God. Illa Rabbal, except the one who cherishes the world. So he's already inviting to think about what God should do. Remember when I said question number 2 should be about what? Not only God exists, but what's his nature? They don't know God. They assume like God can be anything. He says, no, he has to be Rabb. What is Rabb? He cherishes and sustains and cares about all the worlds. Then he gives them examples. He says, God, my God, is the one, khalaqani, he's the one who creates. Who creates for you? Did they create anything? They're stone. Did they create? Think. So I actually always ask this question. So what made you? Go back and study. Ask any honest scientist in molecular biology or physiology. Tell them, what is the origin of the cell? I asked, well, I was in a conversation with one of the top researchers out of this community, because we're talking about what's called synthetic biology. So somebody shared with me, a Muslim, mashallah, thinker as well. He said to me, we're now in the age of what's called synthetic biology. Have you heard of synthetic biology? So the whole idea of manipulating genes,
Creating new cells.
and creating new cells. So I said, fine, I'm going to run it by the top-notch molecular biologist who comes up with this, well, I'm medicine, the guy makes medicines from scratch, like top, very accomplished. I said to him, can you create a thing from nothing? Because I know it doesn't. He says, impossible. If anybody tells you this, they don't know what they're talking about. To this day, even when we manipulate genes, the original substance, we cannot create it. We have to take an original, right? Yeah, we have scientists right here. You have to take the original thing and then adjust it and manipulate. He says it's impossible. Nonsense.
No way.
What is it?
No way.
No way. You have to take an original gene, original this. I'm not a person. Like the DNA has to be there, and then you manipulate it. You cannot create it. You cannot create the chromosome. He says the 23 chromosomes, nobody can create them. The original. He says we can't. And he laughed when I spoke with him, right? So there it is. Here, Ibrahim said it. Who made it? There has to be a source. Otherwise, it came from nothing. Does that make sense? Impossible. To this day, no one can say the work came from nothing. Possible. It has to be a source. So he says he's the one who made me and then guided me. And then he says he's the one who feeds me. He made the food and he made the drink. And when I get ill, he's the one who cures. So what is he doing here? Enlightening them about what God should be. That's my God. What does your God do, Mr. Stone? Does nothing. He just sits there, right? Cannot even hear you. He says, are you fools? Yet we're doing the same behavior now. But look at, again, the methodology of who? Ibrahim, beautiful methodology. And I wonder how many of us, when we teach people, work with them, we teach them about Allah. Not just what do we do? Allah said, pray. Allah said haram. Allah said halal. Allah said can't do that. What are we doing here?
Lazy teaching.
Lazy teaching. We don't know ourselves who God is, but we give them the instructions of God, and they're like, what kind of instructions are these? They have no relationship with God. It's like exactly the people of Ibrahim were worshiping what? Idols. They don't know God. They needed someone to remind, like, hey, by the way, this is a dumb thing, right? Let me teach you about the one. Not about his instructions. His instructions we'll talk about next. We flip it in our cultures. With little wonder, many of our kids have left. Because they don't know Allah. I mean, I don't blame them, right? But Allah is so beautiful. When people have an intimate relationship with Him, the instructions, subhanAllah, they'll come to them. And nobody is going to be perfect with following instructions. It's okay, right? Let them have a relationship with Allah Azza first. But that's the most fundamental. Then I'm going to wrap up with this, inshallah. This is a dua that's like one of my favorite duas in the Quran. Let me actually just wrap up by alluding to how the rest of the surah operates. We talked about it. So let's going to go from the story of Musa to Ibrahim, to Nuh, to Saleh, to and then Shu'aib and Lut, and then see with that consistency, telling us what the outcomes were, how the revelation worked. Inna rabbaka lahuwa al-qawi al-aziz, and then wrap up the end of the surah with a message to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Remember what he said to him at the beginning? Don't grieve. So he says to him in verse 214, what is your responsibility? وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. He says, don't worry. I just wanted to remind and guide, begin with your family. That's your job. Then he says, وَخْفِضْ جَنَاحَكَ لِمَنِ اتَّبَعَكَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and lower you and be humble with the believers. And if they reject you, what should you do?
Anybody.
فَقُلْ إِنِّي بَرِيءٌ مِّمَّا تَعْمَلُونَ. I'm free of what you're saying. I turn to Allah. See, leave it to who? Allah. وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى. Now, Allah's going to use two attributes. He says, turn to and rely on who? Give me two attributes and names of Allah that should go into that verse. Don't look at it. Based on what you heard from the other passages of the Quran when Allah spoke of the other messengers. How did each passage end? وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ. Then when he finally wrapped up the surah talking to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in verse 217 he says, "Tawakkal, put your dependence completely, full trust, and know that you're with who? Al-Aziz al-Rahim." SubhanAllah, it's beautiful.
Who's the God of all of those?
God of Allah, and He's especially the powerful, the merciful. Turn and rely on someone who's like that, not flimsy stone, right? No power but with Allah, no mercy but with Allah. And Allah told us throughout these stories before, Aziz Rahim, Aziz Rahim, Aziz Rahim. Then turn to Him, let's apply it. See, it's easy for us to say, oh, we believe in this. Do we apply it in our lives? Then He tells him something about Allah with interaction right now. He said, الَّذِي يَرَاكَ حِينَ تَقُومُ وَتَقَلُّبَكَ. Who says, right now, why should you trust in Him? He says, right now He sees you when you get up. And when you put your hand on the ground and you're sitting with this crowd, when we're making sujood, imagine in Mecca, millions. You're like sitting, putting your hand on the ground. It's like, how is He going to see me? He says, I see you when you put your head on the ground amongst millions. Billions. I see you as if no one else exists. And sees you and you and you and aware of you completely right now. He's trying to build an intimate connection right now. An awareness that Allah is with you when? Right now. Beautiful. Because that's a thought that liberates, that empowers, that heals. Then he says, you want me to tell you upon who the shaitans fall or come? Because we often say like the shaitan is going to affect such and such. And Allah says, the ones who really ultimately really follow the shaitan are afaq, athim. The ones who really don't want it. They want to continue to rebel. Those are the ones who ultimately get deluded by the shayateen. And subhanAllah, so that's the end of the surah instruction to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But I want to just leave you with a thought about Ibrahim, something beautiful he leaves us with. When he talked to his people about Allah, Allah is real for him, brothers and sisters. I mean, Allah is not something just a fact, right? He feels the presence of Allah right now. He sees Allah as his source. Now, where does faith about Allah, our understanding of Allah, is show up in our worship? Which act of worship really shows your really closeness to Allah the most? Salah, but Salah can become technical. Again, we're struggling. Where do you pay attention? What act of worship do you really put your heart into? Dua. Dua really, because you really feel, because you're asking about things for you. So it brings up what? How much you really understand Allah. If you didn't believe Allah hears you, let me making dua. True? If you don't think Allah is capable, why are you asking? We're actually acknowledging, I believe Allah hears, sees, and is powerful and can do things. That's why it's sad when we doubt. We're making dua and then you doubt, right? Allah loves dua because you put your heart into it and you're aware of Allah right now. You really have khushu'. You notice? We always have khushu' in dua. So, dua also, what do you ask for? We oftentimes ask for needs. And we get caught up with our temporal needs. So dua is reveal what your ultimate aspirations are. True? Where your concerns. People like, Allah just say, Ya Allah, give me, remember the $1 million story? Ya Allah, give me $1,025,000. Ya Allah, give me $1,025,000. He said, why are you asking for $1,025,000? He said, because of the zakat. I get the perfect million, and 25,000 will be the zakat of the million. I don't want, so I'm asking for that on top of it. But he forgot there's 2.5% on the 25,000. Should have, it never, this is my point. That's the aspiration. I mean, like, we know it. And it's okay, ask whatever you want to ask, but what are you asking about? And do you doubt Allah when you ask? And are you putting conditions on Allah? See my point? What would Ibrahim ask? We've seen a lot of instances in the Quran about the du'as of Ibrahim, and Allah's telling us, learn wisdom. Learn what to ask for, learn the priorities. These are the things you really should be concerned with. Du'as reveal where your heart is. So where is Ibrahim's heart? When he taught his people, he says, my Lord feeds me, guides me, created me, and he's the one who gives me life and death, and he's the one who forgives me on the day of judgment. Then he turned to Allah to really show his care, his love of Allah. That's where faith shows up. He says, Rabbi, it's real for him. What did he ask? He says, verse 83. رب هب لي حكما والحقني بالصالحين واجعل لي لسان صدق في الآخرين أسفين واجعلني من ورثة جنة النعيم واغفر لأبي إنه كان من الضالين ولا تخزني يوم يبعثون يوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم. 6 things he asked for. They're the summary of all important things. What do you think these 6 things would be? What would you ask? If I tell you 6 things to ask for, what would you ask for? Here's what he asked for. Let's learn them quickly. We don't have time to go over them. First thing he asked for, Ya Allah, grant me good judgment here. Because he doesn't trust himself. He knows that my judgment can really sway me away from truth. Isn't it true? Any moment. Ya Allah, grant me sound judgment, to live life soundly, to make wise decisions. Look at the next thing he asked. Al-Hiqni. Ibrahim is asking, Ya Allah, join me with the righteous. Company is important, brothers and sisters. You can't survive on your own. But Ibrahim is asking, the king of the righteous is saying, Ya Allah, yeah, he's so humble, he says, I want to be with the righteous. Can you imagine? Look at the humility. He didn't say, I'm the righteous. Join me with the righteous. You can't make it in life. So he asked for things in this life. What were they? Judgment and wisdom. And join me with the righteous. He understood in life here, that's what you need to get to your destination. Mind that can see, that is not arrogance. Heart that is open, but also companionship of the righteous. And to also be joined with them in the next world. Make sense? Now, I'm going to die. What do I ask for after my death until the day of judgment? He's so smart. He's thinking about his life beyond his life. Not just the hereafter. Look at what he says next. وَاجْعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ. He says, I'm going to die one day. I want my life to be multiplied. How do I multiply my life? He says, Ya Allah, here's what he says. Grant me honorable mention. Words at the tongues of people after I die. What does that mean? What do you think? Make people think well of me after I'm dead. That when they think of me, they think of good things I've done, and first praise me for them. Not that he wants praise, because he wants people to follow a good example, and then follow the good deeds that I've done. Why? Because if people follow what you've done and it's good, it's adding to your life, even after your death. Imagine the blessing that when you died, people are talking about your good life, and your goodness, and your mercy, and your care, and you left things that benefit people. He's asking for it. He's already thinking of how to multiply his life by good reputation, intelligence. Then for the hereafter, what does he ask for? وَاجْعَلْ لِي مِنْ وَرَثَةِ جَنَّةِ النَّعِيمِ. Ya Allah, for the hereafter, make me among the inheritors of paradise. And he doesn't forget about his father. He says, Ya Allah, forgive my father. And do not disgrace me on the day of judgment. Pay attention to that dua. It encompasses all good things in this world, hereafter, and in between. What is it in between? The point at your death, when you die, until resurrection. Very intelligent. And I'll stop here. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. What's the score? No, I borrowed this from somebody was telling us a story yesterday. They were listening to what's his name? Sheikh Meng. Mufti Meng. And I think it was the championship soccer game European. It was like Liverpool playing soccer. Yeah. So he asked people, and he was giving this. I was like, what's the score, Liverpool? And somebody's like, yeah, it's 2-0. It's like, you shouldn't have. Like, are you paying attention to me, or are you on your phone? So he was just trying to make fun of it, but also to just. Somehow it was. I asked him that as a trick, but alhamdulillah, nobody was looking at the phone. It's okay. What's the score, by the way?
I'm not looking at the score.
No, not you. Actually curious. What's the score?